Hi, welcome to History B. Now, History B is a B-level course that is, like all the B-level courses, marked by an outside panel. Okay, so there are specific marking criteria, and your essay will be marked by an external panel of history teachers, okay, and myself. The course consists of writing 2 essays. And like in many of the B subjects, most of the B subjects, we will spend most of our time talking about how to write these essays. So you get to live with the topic you choose for about 18 weeks. So one of the most important things I can say to you is choose a topic that really interests you. The essay for first semester is an essay about an individual in history and different perspectives on that individual. And then the second essay is an in-class essay about the time your individual lived in. So you have a lot of freedom to choose who you want to write about and what period of time you want to write about. So think carefully about who you want to choose to write about. Now, before we start with the rest of the lecture today, I want you to look at pages 5 to 7 in your book and carefully read the marking criteria. And then come back to this and we can continue. So this being the first lesson, we will look at the assessment criteria, a suggested essay structure for the first essay. We will look at a student example, and I'll remind you of a few things you have to remember whilst writing this essay. Sometimes this seems like a lot of information to grab hold of, so just don't worry too much if you don't understand immediately what you have to do, okay? It becomes clearer as we go on, and I will take you step by step on how to write the essay. So the key thing is, don't worry. Okay, so this time you have to write an essay about an individual, and it is the first of 2 essays you must write for this course. The first essay you write about an individual in history, and the second essay you talk about the time that the individual lived in. The first essay is a research essay, and the second essay is an in-class essay. But we will talk about that a bit later. It sounds scary, but it really isn't. So let's concentrate on the first essay about an individual. Okay. The essay brief says you have to write an academic essay that analyzes an historical issue from varying perspectives. The historical issue we talk about is the role of the individual. So in this case, the essay must focus on a selected historical issue, examine the significance of the issue and in its historical context, account for and evaluate at least 2 various perspectives on the individual, on the issue, use a wide range of relevant and credible evidence to support arguments, include a bibliography with 2 annotated items. Okay, that sounds complicated, but it really isn't. What it really means is that you look at a famous individual in history, you pick 2 historians and see how they describe that individual. Easy. So the formal assessment requirements are that the text must follow the structure and format of an academic essay. Your analysis must be supported by evidence from research. The essay should be 16 to 1800 words long, not including the bibliography. And the bibliography must include a minimum of 5 varied and relevant references, including 1 primary source, and the rest can be secondary sources. To continue, the annotations should evaluate sources for authenticity and credibility. So less than 100 words for each. You can submit as many drafts as you like, and the final copy must be typed and submitted by the due date. which I don't know what it is yet, but I will let you know. So the essay is primarily about two historians discussing a famous person in history, and most of the essay is about what the historians say about the person in history. So you spend most of the time in the essay talking about the historians and their perspective on the famous person. So a proposed essay plan that I've outlined here is that in the first paragraph is the introduction. Paragraph 2 is the issue and the historical context. Paragraph 3 is a brief biography of the individual or of the famous person. Paragraph 4, you talk about the first historian and you talk about who they are. Paragraph 5, you talk about what the first historian said about your famous person. Paragraph 6 and 7, you do the same thing as you do in paragraph 4 and 5 with another historian. And then paragraph 8 and 9, you compare the two historians, and then you write a conclusion. So this diagram is an outline of what the essay looks like, paragraph by paragraph. And I'll be using this diagram as in every lesson to show you exactly what we're discussing, what paragraph we're discussing in each lesson, okay? So you'll be seeing a lot of this particular diagram. This is an example that a student wrote about Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, the famous communist, Vladimir Lenin. In the introduction, so let's have a look at this as an example. In the introduction, the student talks about they're going to discuss Lenin's role as a leader and chief ideologue of the Bolshevik Revolution, and analyse two contrasting perspectives on Lenin by Maximov and Leblanc. Okay, so in the introduction, they've clearly stated who the individual is and who their two historians are. This paragraph is about the historical context of the Russian Revolution. In it, the student talks about the taxation, about the economic situation, the social situation, and the political situation of Russia before Lenin came to power. Okay? This continues the discussion about the historical context before the Tsar abdicated. This essay is in your book, by the way. So this is paragraph 3. In this case, the essay is about Vladimir Lenin, who was the founder of the Russian Revolution and the communist state of the USSR. So this is the paragraph that comes after the historical context paragraph. And it's basically a brief biography of Vladimir Lenin, where he was born, who he married, and how he got involved into socialist politics and how he became an important figure in the Russian Revolution. And this is a continuation of that paragraph. You'll note that he actually quotes Lenin, which would be his primary source as required by the requirements of the essay. So these two paragraphs are about the first historian, and you'll see that in this essay the student spends more time talking about the historian's perspectives on Lenin rather than on the history of Lenin. Okay, so the fourth paragraph is a brief biography of the first historian, whose name is Maximov, and it talks about how Maximov was anti-Lenin. And then the second paragraph discusses how Maximov talks about Lenin. And Maximov, being anti-Lenin, will obviously say that Lenin was not a very good person. This is a continuation of that paragraph about Maximov's view on Lenin. He talks about how Maximov says Lenin's plan from the beginning was a dictatorship of the party, and that Lenin was not a true socialist. In the next paragraph, the student talks about Paul LeBlanc, who is an American historian who naturally has a different perspective on Lenin than Maximov. Right? He's a Trotskyist, which is a different sort of socialist. He gives a brief biography of Paul LeBlanc, and then he talks about Paul LeBlanc's idea of Lenin, what Paul LeBlanc thought of Lenin. And what Paul LeBlanc thinks is different to what Maximov thinks of Lenin. This is just a continuation of LeBlanc's argument. This is perhaps the most important part of the essay. It's the comparison between the two historians. He talks about how they differ in their ideas about Lenin. And you can see as we go on through the essay that most of this essay is about the historians and their perspectives rather than the individual. And that's the key thing here. If you look at the assessment criteria in the book, there are 5 assessment criteria, and 2 of those are about looking at different perspectives. So that is what the majority of the essay is about. It's about looking at 2 historians and what they think of your individual, rather than concentrating on the individual themselves. This is a continuation of the analysis of both historians. This student did very well in the essay because they spent a lot of time looking at comparing LeBlanc and Maximov. So in conclusion, the student writes a conclusion as well, and the conclusion is very short because the student has spent most of their time talking about the comparison between the 2 historians. The student got full marks for this essay because they did spend most of their time talking about the different historians. So the key things to think about when you're writing the essay: you must have a paragraph on historical context because one part of the assessment criteria is about historical context. That's worth 5 marks for you. 2 parts of the assessment criteria are on the perspectives of historians. So most of the essay is about the 2 historians. Okay, so it may seem confusing at the moment, but it does become clearer as we go along. At the moment, all you need to know is these 2 bits here. Okay, so I'm sure you're feeling pretty confused by now. I advise you to have a look in the booklet and think about an individual you might want to write about. Have a look at the essays in the booklet, including the one we've just gone through. Read the marking criteria very carefully and do the comparison exercise in the booklet. That should keep you going. Now, I think the key thing at the moment is to find an individual you want to write about. So think of somebody who is important and who you're interested in and who is a little bit controversial. Next week, we will talk a bit more about an individual, who is an appropriate individual to look at. Until then, I hope this has been okay. Give me some feedback if you like. Drop me an email. See you next week.